Hello and welcome to DigFin VOX, Voices in Digital Finance. I'm your host, James DiBiasio. If you enjoy the program, give us a like, subscribe, let the algorithm know. Institutional investors are keener than mustard to get into digital assets, yet they still lack the kind of custody solutions that they require. My guest today to talk about this is Swen Werner, Managing Director at State Street Digital in London. He is responsible for building out State Street's custody proposition for digital assets, and Irfan Ahmad in Singapore, who is also at State Street working on the client side. Swen Werner, Irfan Ahmad, welcome to DigFin VOX.
Hey, thank you very much.
Thanks very much for having us.
My pleasure. We're going to be talking about custody in the context of blockchain finance and crypto. This has been an ongoing question around what makes custody so challenging in digital asset space. It doesn't seem to be that it's a like for like. Swen, you are in charge of the digital asset and payments infrastructure building at State Street Digital. When you're looking at creating an institutional custody approach in this space, what did you have to sort of go back to in terms of first principles, and what did you have to get rid of?
Yeah, that's actually an excellent question, because that very much describes a lot of the discussions we've had over the last couple of months whilst we have been on a journey to build that institutional platform. So I think the first point really is it doesn't really exist today, particularly when you look at cryptocurrencies, to truly have an institutional platform. And what that means in a way is we are able to serve institutional asset managers who on the one hand side are subject to a set of their own asset management specific regulations in terms of ensuring things like ownership verification, that you can truly confirm that the assets are there, but also as a regulated bank in terms of compliance and AML requirements. We have to bring that together and then say, well, to the extent the crypto market being this decentralized marketplace where there are a lot of the traditional setups that you have in the custody space, you have a centralized market infrastructure, you have sub-custodians, all of these kind of typical elements are missing. You have to really think, well, how do we make something that is custody today for securities being very much an idea about a centralized marketplace? How do you really apply this in a decentralized market infrastructure? And so a number of aspects there are then difficult to really get a hand around in terms of, for instance, simple things like you have a consensus mechanism and therefore, in a sense, a probabilistic finality. So every blockchain will confirm if your transaction is picked, that a settlement took place, but you will have to wait a certain time in order to get confidence that this being really the case. And so what is a good choice? Do we wait 2 blocks, 4 blocks, 6 blocks? And what is expected from our clients going forward to how quickly they want to act based on this kind of confirmation? And that in turn then has an impact on when would we, for instance, apply certain controls around these assets now being in custody of State Street. So that whole workflow, in a sense, is very, very different to how we would traditionally think about something. A Swift message comes in, you book it in the account, and you're done. But now it's kind of the opposite. A confirmation has happened, and now you start to think, is this the right time now to make these assets available, or do we have to wait in order to get the confidence that the settlement actually took place?
In the Bitcoin world, for example, the ethos has been be your own bank. This is obviously not aimed at institutionals, but that's been the way that people have perceived the I guess call it a benefit of crypto. Be your own bank as opposed to relying on a third party. When it comes to institutions, obviously they've got compliance and licensing and a variety of other issues that makes that impractical. But how much of that be your own bank ethos has to go into a custody solution designed for digital assets? Or do you have to sort of ignore that, put that aside, and still have something that's a very, licensed or regulated central intermediary role?
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent question. So in a way, I think it has to go really be part of your your long-term vision. This is ultimately, if you think about digital assets, they are inherently a peer-to-peer decentralized technology, or enabling a peer-to-peer decentralized marketplace based on this kind of technology. You can't just like simply ignore that, in a way provide the flexibility that this can be, the benefit of this can be made available to clients. Now, I think the challenge in a way is that certain types of regulated institutional investors at the moment find a number of regulatory challenges to invest in crypto assets, like a 40 Act fund in the US or a UCITS in Europe. So in a way, what exactly will be expected from those organizations in future, if and when they can invest in these instruments, has to be seen. We've seen the first steps, for instance, in Europe with MiCA, where the regulatory framework is now being established to potentially allow this going forward. Now, there's a reason in terms of why the industry is set up like it is today. You want to ensure that there is if you want, a segregation of duties between the portfolio management and the back office, in order to ensure, that the assets are really there and kept safely. So in that sense, having a organization involved to support that is, I think, something that I would expect to continue going forward. However, a lot of the benefits that are typically associated with digital assets more broadly, not just crypto, but also in terms of tokenized financial instruments, then stem from this idea of having automated workflows, and that at the very essence is an application of a smart contract. So you have workflow programmed into your digital assets. Now, whatever you want to call that, that means that by investing in a particular type of digital asset, an investor therefore would also subject itself to the associated rules that are embedded in this smart contract. And therefore, even by being the custodian for this, we then have to adhere to, if you want, that kind of standard. That's the first step in terms of providing a different kind of market model, where different assets and the issuer that has created those assets would quite a workflow.
Right, that could create some issues for you. The code may supersede what you would normally want to do as a service provider.
Well, in a way, it would take over certain bits and pieces that would today be done either at a CSD infrastructure level or custodian. And we just have to provide the flexibility to, if you want to work with that differentiated workflow that now could differ from one asset class to the next.
Irfan, you're working with clients in the Asia Pac region. As they're getting their head around being able to play in the digital asset space, what are some of the questions that you're getting from a custody point of view?
So there's been a number of questions that have kind of come forward from institutional investors across Asia Pacific, and really they're related almost solely around what is and isn't permissible as far as the jurisdiction in which they're looking to try and operate or create exposure or indirect exposure to these types of cryptocurrencies or digital assets. One such item that's kind of come up of late has been the way in which ownership might be perceived by a regulatory jurisdiction, and not only that, but what would be the appropriate licenses that should be inferred to the provider of virtual asset services in terms of providing custodial services. So a lot of it boils really back down to the way in which regulation is being formulated in each one of the jurisdictions that our clients are looking to kind of create these services in. Not only that, but I think from an operational standpoint, because it's such a huge shift from what they know and have been used to providing in terms of funds that they've issued or distributed in region, they need to kind of get their heads around what this might mean in terms of a digital first set of capabilities that they're looking to launch. So, as early as 2017, where we started seeing lots and lots of family offices and hedge funds in Asia Pacific launch these funds, and that's well documented. There's been a number of different reports that have come out over the years that have indicated a steady growth in terms of the number of funds, as well as the assets that have been accumulated under those funds in offshore fund structures that have typically emanated from Asia Pacific in terms of the issuers and in terms of their domicile. But I think as we kind of step forward, we've seen that the types of strategies that have been implemented by clients that have been looking to provide exposure to crypto assets through traditional and non-traditional fund structures has also started to vary. So they've not just been in the main coins on the crypto side, but they're also looking at alternative coins that might be able to reap them some greater reward away from kind of the main coins itself. In terms of the actual custody conundrum, they're now starting to think a little bit more verbosely about what an institutional like offering might be that would help them to be able to then attract greater amounts of deposits and subscriptions from institutional investors that are really seeking that institutional grade custody offering that that has been somewhat lacking in the market over the last few years.
Do you feel that if you get this right and you engender the confidence of your clients in that regard, that this will unlock a large amount of institutional allocation into the digital asset space?
I think that we have seen some steady increases as far as institutional asset owners and asset managers have been wading into this space over time. I think what we've certainly noted in terms of this last crypto winter is that there has been more announcements coming from the traditional side where they're looking to take advantage either from investments into the ecosystem or launching private funds that potentially would allow their end clients exposure to these types of assets in the future. I think those types of announcements are becoming a little bit more frequent, and they're being met by and followed up with consultations from mature traditional jurisdictions in which those players tend to play. So we've certainly seen a broader set of clients starting to come to us and suggesting that this is something that they would have interest in exploring further and understanding what the operational implications might be in terms of engaging in this market as they kind of see it as a asset class that is emerging that allow them to have greater return profiles from the underlying asset.
What is the demand, Sven, one for you, as you're building this? Do you think the demand will continue to be the pure crypto side, whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum or the altcoins, or do you have a sense that you're trying to build something that will be designed more for tokenization, representations of traditional securities, but in a purely digital form, or things in between? Where do you see this infrastructure going?
So from my side, I mean, it's very clearly what we're building is a digital asset platform. So therefore, cryptocurrencies are a use case, but it has to be ready to support also, tokenized financial instruments. But for me, it's very important. You cannot at all think of these as two different things. Where do we have the biggest tokenization market? Well, today it's within crypto. It's not outside. So you can tokenize a digital asset and tokenize it again and again, and that's exactly what's happening in crypto markets today. So why this market is so appealing, I think, for financial marketplace is really these techniques and possibilities that are created within the cryptocurrency market that really translate so well into a lot of the activities a institutional marketplace would take. And what I said earlier around the potential of efficiency gains we can get from this is really related to this. Today, you have a financial instrument, a bond, and you would invest in this, or you would allocate this as collateral. In the crypto market, you kind of now create a different digital asset for that specific purpose. So if you want to have your tokenized financial bond in that instance now being allocated as collateral, you just don't hand it over to someone to manage this. You create a new digital asset that is then specific for this purpose, and all of the workflows are programmed into that. And that thinking is really something we can learn and will learn from the cryptocurrency market, because it drives a real different engagement model with your counterparties in order to transact on your various business needs.
What do you think will be the biggest driver for people to use, whether it's State Street Digital or a like-minded competitor? What will be the biggest value add that you think you will be able to add to this space?
Well, I think the first thing obviously is the safety in terms of making sure that your digital assets are protected. So that's this key management conundrum, if you want, and you have to get it right. And here, I think for me, is the first thing is this notion that the crypto market has really evolved around the a cold storage on one hand side where your key material is held offline, and that being by some secured as a safe way of protecting the key material versus a hot storage that you find in exchanges, and really having to make this trade-off. Do I want to be able to transact on my investments quickly and therefore being able to react to market changes versus the need to not being able to do this and holding this in offline storage. And that's something that we definitely want to overcome and actually be able to forget about this and saying there are ways where you can have your cake and eat it too, in terms of there are key management solutions that we are implementing, like MPC, multi-party computation, embedded in a institutional, if you want, IT infrastructure that will allow us to provide safety without necessarily having to lock everything away in the bunker and have people coming in and out and doing this kind of stuff.
How would that work?
Yeah.
Could you maybe just illustrate that or break it down so it's quite as simple as you can, so we understand what this is different than just having to choose between a hot or a cold wallet, either you're plugged in or not?
Well, it's really if you want to, what you trust in. So as I said, cold is really the having the key material offline, and therefore what you do is, if you want to do a transaction, you bring your transactional detail into that offline area. You create a transaction, which means you create your digital signature based on that key material, and then take that signed transaction out of that secure place and then put it back into your online world for it to be transacted. So basically, you rely very much on individuals, human beings, carrying stuff backwards and forwards between where you operate normally versus where the key material is done. And then if you think about an institutional framework, you have investors that sit across the globe, they want to transact 24/7. That makes it, for me, very difficult to imagine how this could be a good solution. So what we have done is relying our infrastructure on something that's called multi-party computation. That basically means that instead of there being one key, there's actually never one key. What you do for another cryptographic algorithm is you create in a decentralized way so-called key shards, and that means they are mathematically linked to each other. That when you want to sign a transaction, each of these key materials creates a part of that required transaction, and then it's assembled together. So what it does at the core is, if you think about this, it removes the single point of failure that is associated with a lot of the traditional key management solutions, because there's no single key. It's very difficult if you want to get attacked from that side, because you have these shards held in multiple places, and it's from the outside very difficult to understand which of these key shards belongs together, because every account that you would manage would have its own set of key shards that come together. And that's really what we are implementing.
Ultimately, though, is there still a point of a human point where somebody has the key to bring those shards together and have them execute in a combined, in an organized way?
No, that's what I'm saying. So the key shards, they never come together. They're always used on their own to, if you want, sign part of the transaction, and then the transaction itself is assembled together. So that's the key thing. You do not have a single key to start with, and also you never, put these keys together at a single point in time in order to do your transaction.
I think if you put it another way as well, like what you're thinking about in traditional custody is that where you have like traditional controls, almost like a safety blanket around maker checkers and 4i checks, in terms of mitigating the risks that are associated with the traditional way of custodying assets, that's kind of removed because you've got blockchain-enabled platforms that will remove the need for things like reconciliations that will take place on the chain.
Okay, very interesting. How confident are you, or at least your clients, that this is a tested cryptography that people have faith that it's going to protect their assets?
In crypto land, so the market is 10-year-old, so it's you cannot start from there. What you have to really think is, what is the right model at this time, and also in line of, if you want, the market changes coming there. So that's, I think, very, very important for everything we are now talking about. This is not like in the normal sense where every 10 or 20 years, the security industry migrates from one ISO standard to the next. And so therefore, we have a long time to prepare. This, if you want, speed of change is happening very fast. And so therefore, we have done extensive due diligence on the available technology to us. And we think that approach is a good one, but it may change in a couple of years' time. And so so this technology is evolving, and we'll have to prepare and adapt in light of market changes.
Okay, well, at least that's very exciting. What does that mean from the client side in terms of what do they need to be able to do to use your custody or to engage in multi-party computation or other things? Do they need to upgrade their IT, their integration? Is there a big ask on the investor side for these sorts of services?
The ask is, I think, quite big, and also in terms of there's a lot to learn if you want from crypto investments, how these assets operate. So I think that there's a need to get in there. Now, in terms of the second infrastructure, we will maintain the private key. So that's the first thing. From that sense, a client really doesn't have to do anything. They will have to send us a transaction saying, I want to buy or like a hold or deliver a digital asset somewhere. So that sense, the getting into that space as far as State Street is concerned is relatively straightforward. But what they do have to do is basically obviously make sure that their portfolio managers are now able to trade in these assets, and so therefore clients will seek their own trading relationships, for instance, with a broker, etc., to provide them the investment as such into the crypto space.
On the compliance side, Irfan, around the region, how easy or difficult will it be for an institutional custody solution in digital assets be to, first, let's just start off with agree on the taxonomy. So if someone's trading a crypto asset, do all the regulators have a similar way of saying that's a currency or that's a commodity or that's a security? And how does that sort of flow into the services that you want to provide?
Yeah, so look, that's a great question, and actually, I think the way that that we've kind of been on this journey has seen regulatory authorities have a little bit more harmony in terms of the way in which they speak in terms of digital assets. Digital assets as an umbrella is anything from cryptocurrencies, or at least the way that we describe it is anything from cryptocurrencies, security tokens, NFTs, CBDCs, and everything else in between. So coming up with an appropriate set of definitions that allow for regulators and the industry at large to be able to understand how this is actually going to work across that whole gambit or that whole spectrum of digital assets and instruments is not an easy task. So there's ongoing discussions in some jurisdictions in the way in which certain cryptocurrencies might be treated as a security, and this obviously has implications as far as tax, operational, reporting, fiduciary responsibilities in the investment managers and so on and so forth are concerned. But in terms of what we're starting to see now is that we're encouraged that banks are are kind of coming together and speaking in the same terms in order to then be able to bring the entire industry on a journey. So regulatory clarity has been a significant thing that has come back from every survey worth their salt from across the industry, and that's certainly something that's starting to, I guess, rhyme, at least across jurisdictions. It may not be exactly the same thing, but we're starting to see a little bit more in terms of the way in which, say, for instance, prudential regulatory authorities are really speaking in terms about these types of assets and what the treatment should theoretically be based on the definition that they come up with. And of course, that also drives kind of like innovation. So, we're starting to see some regulators think more earnestly about how they might be able to create a common set of standards. And again, standards is the operative word here. In terms of ensuring that there is some level of consistency from jurisdictions. I know certainly from our institutional clients, they operate with us across multiple jurisdictions. So we operate in 100 markets, and so the client experience is incredibly important in terms of allowing us to be able to build scale solutions. And I think that's also true within the digital asset sphere as well. The expectation is there to have a consistent experience no matter where you might be transacting or creating or distributing those digital assets.
Yeah, you sort of preempted my follow-on question, which was about standards, but maybe I'll just spin it a slightly different way for Sven, which is, what are the standards that you hope to be able to drive? Because you were talking about, Sven, your last comment was how this is all really sort of happening in real time, you know, and which is great, but you also want to make sure that that what you're doing is going to be compatible with what other institutions are doing, or with what other marketplaces are up to. So when you think about these issues of standards, where do you hope to have the most impact? Is there a particular area that you think is critical?
Yeah, I think that's we have to think about standards in a very different way. So today you have a market infrastructure. In a way, it is enabled by regulation, if you want to enforce, dictate, whatever you want to call that, orchestrate the industry to interoperate in a certain way. So a CSD may say, well, I only will accept you know, messages in a certain standardized format, and otherwise you cannot participate. Now, we have the same thing in blockchain, but it's no longer really a question of a group of banks or a market infrastructure coming together to defining that. That market standard is effectively within the blockchain protocol. It is the network protocol. It's the, if you want, the rules around that, and you have to subscribe to that. So the difference really is you will have standards, but the what makes it a standard as today is the acceptance, but that acceptance process is a decentralized process. So therefore, if an institutional investor were to decide, I like to invest in a particular type of digital assets, and so ERC20 token, one of those terms of, let's say, a certain kind of definition around how a token is being structured, then by doing this kind of, if you want, convention now takes hold and is being adopted more broadly. So I think what's very key, this being at the moment the very early stages of this automated smart flow driven universe, that we find ways to, as an industry, also to express our requirements that are then embedded in these kind of instruments, and making sure a good way of driving automated workflows through a smart contract is this and not that, and therefore making sure that the, if you want, the innovation that we see in that space is enforced. But you no longer can just like make it happen. You will have to convince, if you want, the consensus mechanism, you know, 51% of the network to follow you, and then you have a good chance.
Right. Okay. So last question then is, if we project ahead, I don't know what the right time frame is. A year, two? I don't know. You can guide me on that. What were you excited about in terms of being able to offer institutional level custody for digital assets? You know, what do you see yourself as being able to say, okay, this is what we're doing, and this is the value. This is the cool stuff that is allowing people to do things that they weren't able to do before.
Yeah. So I think for me, it's really seeing the how things come together. It's no longer a question of you have a cryptocurrency portfolio investment on the one hand side, and you have your normal stuff. How does it actually come together? And there are a number of opportunities in this. The instrument types, for instance, like stablecoin, etc., how they are being used today in the crypto market as a means of payment for making crypto investments. Why couldn't it be a good idea also for institutional flows, particular when you have clients that may be operating through multiple entities, and you could use it? So these ideas where suddenly you think about, I'm using the digital asset space for more than just providing custody of crypto investments, but also using now these instruments in order to drive efficiency. That's something that I find really exciting. And in a way, there are only few organizations which can do that, where you already have access to institutional investors and they've trusted you to take care of their traditional portfolios. And now we're adding crypto, but we don't want to run this as, if you want, two different worlds. We're looking for every opportunities to, if you want, to provide the benefit of the digital investment side to the traditional portfolios and the other way around. So there's a real, I would say, excitement around how both could inspire each other to make improvements going forward.
Yeah, and Irfan, do you have a sense yet of how much of the traditional business can be improved upon or transformed by what you're doing on the digital side?
Yeah, so some of the common use cases that we've kind of been looking at and have been kind of guided towards by our clients are some of the more private markets opaque assets, assets with liquidity profile that has the potential to be transformed, and therefore allow for a greater velocity of trading activity that might be able to take place in those markets. And again, it's really something that like I want to come back to in terms of the standardization, creating a common platform that all of these assets can exist and transact upon. And in a way, it's building upon what Sven's hopes and dreams are in terms of the merge that we see between traditional and digital. This I think is the most important aspect, and bringing all of those assets online will help transform the way in which institutional investors will operate in the future. I mean, I know that say for instance, we look at macro trends like direct indexing and the potential for tokenization to have a huge impact for fractional ownership of things, and then being able to democratize otherwise illiquid assets and use those platforms to be able to distribute and then pick a personalized portfolio based on your wants and needs and your values. I think all of those things are really made possible by the advent of digital assets, and a singular platform that would enable clients from an institutional point of view, at least to begin with, and that's what we're looking to build, to be able to build in common standards and common capability that would extend far beyond what they do today on the traditional side.
Great. Well, I think we're going to leave it at that. That's a great way to end our conversation today. Swen Werner and Irfan Ahmad from State Street Digital, thank you so much for joining me on DigFin VOX.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.